Thanks so much for that, and thank you to, is that loud enough? I don't speak very loud, sorry. To Sarah and the conference organizers for inviting me to speak here today. I'm hoping that some of the lessons we've learned in our project, some of the mistakes we've made and things we've done will be useful to your projects moving forward potentially. I'd also like to acknowledge that we are on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people and thank them for their gracious hospitality. So I'm going to talk about, is that making a noise? I'm going to talk about collective access, which is, sure. Okay. Our implementation of collective access. So it's a software program, a collection management system that we've spent the last few years kind of developing and forming into something we're hoping will work for our library, museum, archive, and our Holocaust survivor testimony collection. Because we're kind of in the last few months of getting it onto our servers and getting it ready, I don't have it live to show you or a lot of screenshots or anything. I did get our team to put a little bit into the system, so I have something to show you. But I think talking about it will be great, and I'm happy to share it once it's out and live. And so, wow, I wasn't nervous before, but wow. Kidding, sorry. Okay, so here we go. So I work at the Vancouver Holocaust Education Centre, as Alyssa said. It's a teaching museum. We're devoted to anti-racism education, so basically promoting human rights, social justice, and genocide awareness through education and remembrance of the Holocaust. It started in 1983 in Vancouver by Holocaust survivors. Our center was built in 1994. We have a very large education mandate. So we engage over 25 students and teachers annually. We have a symposium at UBC annually as well as around the Lower Mainland. We produce thematic exhibits, school programs, teaching materials, and we present a number of public and cultural events and commemorative events. We also have a museum collection, an archives, a Holocaust survivor testimony collection, and a library collection. Our Holocaust survivor testimony collection, which I think is maybe most relevant to, I'll focus a fair bit on today, began in 1979 and goes through to the present. We continue to collect Holocaust survivor testimonies. We've been fortunate to have some funding over the last few years to digitize our collection, so all of our audio or video, and as well as our museum and archives collection. So we're in the middle of a 3 to 4 year project to do that. However, it wasn't robustly cataloged. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well. And we lacked a robust collection management system. We had a proprietary dated database that was just not effectual in us getting access to anything. So when we sat down, we realized, how do we do this? And so we naively went searching for a system that would give us library, archive, museum, and audiovisual kind of asset management in one space, particularly since we were going to be digitizing and utilizing this in our education mandate. And we kind of came up against either it was really, really, really expensive and unsustainable. I should mention we're a nonprofit and grant funded, and so sometimes that's great, other times there's no grants, so as I think many organizations here, it's ebb and flow. So sustainability is huge for us. When we have grant funding, we try to build the capacity, and we also try to leverage that so they can reach out to the communities that have helped us in the past and build cultural heritage, sustainability, and capacity within a larger construct. So we went looking and kind of found nothing, really. Either, like I said, there were a couple of systems that said they could do all of that, but were very expensive. They were proprietary and out of our means. So we went down the open source route. We don't have reliable tech support. Again, as a nonprofit, we kind of have intermittent and as needed tech support. So initially we were quite nervous about going down the open source route, but we've fully embraced it. I'll talk about that, and are pretty excited about the outcome of that. And the nice thing is that all of the investment that we're able to put into developing and building our system, we're then able to then share, and other people can pick it up and use it in any way they like. So it's pretty great. So I'm going to talk first about collaboration. So I don't know if you're an archivist, a librarian, or a curator, you might get this, but The irony here is that we couldn't even decide on what word, whether it was a bar or a room, or where did they walk into? So that shows you, not only do we not have the same protocols for managing information, we can't even decide what room we're supposed to be in. So I was preparing for this talk, I was chatting with our museum curator and saying, how do I summarize some of the complexities that we encountered? And there was often, as this we'll see, a lot of humor in the room, because we're trained in institutions like this to hold on to these paradigms of archival practice or museum practice or library practice or digitization protocols that give us these instructions and tell us how information should be managed, and then we kind of go into these spaces and do that and enact those protocols. But in our space, we were small, and so we decided to kind of try to break down some of those barriers, because we wanted to kind of say, well, what if you don't know what you're looking for? And we wanted to take the best of all of those disciplines and put them forward. So libraries are great at access, and archives, quite frankly, are kind of rubbish at it. But they're really, really good at aggregations and context. And museums are great at that really in-depth, provenance information about objects, and digitization opens up a ton of possibilities, but also a lot of problems that we've heard a lot about over the last few days around access protocols, permissions, etc. So we kind of threw all of these things into the room with all of these different professionals, and it wasn't always fun, or we didn't always get along, but we always really, I think, went into it with the spirit of really wanting to break down some of these barriers and build up something potentially better, or moving us in a direction of collaboration, sustainability. So we worked to build this system, I should say, with developers under our grant, and so we built it really in an innovative and experimental way, in the hopes of doing this. And we always put our collections and our community at the core of it, because our connection is so specific to the Holocaust. So it includes pre-war life, mostly in Europe. It includes Holocaust-era documentation, artifacts, and stories, and then post-war settlement in Canada, primarily British Columbia, as well as a robust testimony collection. So we work towards eliminating these silos, towards educating each other about our discipline's specific strengths and weaknesses, and worked at building these cross-discipline interrelationships. And so for the collections, we decided to go with open source, as I mentioned, and we took this cross-collection approach. We were going to build a system that everything lived in. As we uncovered what collective access could do for us, there was a lot of wins for sure. It opened up, I think we gave our developers quite a challenge. We have over 7 metadata schematas in there. So we kind of really cherry-picked, and everybody in the system kind of shares each other. So it's one large, basically, profile. And we pick our favorite things from what we have. So we assembled a team, essentially, and I'll talk about them a little bit throughout. We have a librarian, a metadata librarian, archivists, digitization experts, museum experts on our team, a lot of students that are brilliant and gung-ho and keen. And we took this cross-collection approach. So we settled on actually putting all 4 collections in. At one point, we weren't sure we'd be able to pull it off, and we're a few weeks to launch, so hopefully we will. And we put access as a priority. So, but access, unlike we've been hearing a lot today, access can be difficult when you have sensitive materials. And so our mandate is education. We use an education commemoration. We use our testimonies. We haven't been able to use them because they've been sitting on pneumatic tapes and other media on shelves for a very long time. So by digitizing those, we needed to find a way to make them accessible. But as we looked through all of the institutional documentation, we had just this plethora of permissions, and they all had different, they were from different decades and different projects. And so we had to do a lot of unpacking there. And what we realized was access wasn't very straightforward. So we had to build a system that allowed for applications of metadata and allowed for us to kind of push certain things to the front, pull certain things back, again, similar to what we've been talking about all day, but also to kind of ease out. So as we kind of figured out these permissions, we could make these things more and more accessible and usable, and also friendly to students and researchers who wanted to work in the system. We had a lot of legacy data and a lot of systems that were proprietary and old, so we had to wrangle the data out of these. And as our survivor community ages, we anticipate quite a large growth in the next few years of testimonies as well as artifacts as well as documents coming into our collection. So we really want to be ready to make these things available as they come, because while we've been doing this for a long time, they've kind of been tucked away. So digitization allows us to do this and the system that supports it. We did a lot of customization to the system. So the nice thing about open source is you can do that. So we've had plugins where we can do timelines, we can do story maps, and I'll go into a little bit of that. It allowed us to really, really customize our metadata. So we can have transcriptions and translations and transliterations that we can attach to testimonies. We can have, all kinds of protocols. But as we worked through the system, we realized it's a relational database. So as soon as you put the data in there, it works really, really hard and well to find it. And so even though you've said, it's an anonymous donation, you still have that person's information in there. So we really had to, as we moved forward through the system, there were lots of places where the data that was supposed to be suppressed would pop up unexpectedly. So that was a tougher challenge, because we had a library which was constantly pushing all of its information out, and the other collections, which we consider the primary source collections, which were far more mediated and complex in their requirements. And then sustainability. So sustainability at many levels, and for us as a small organization who happens to be fortunate to have a healthy grant window right now, has also experienced times when we haven't had many. So reaching out to communities to build capacity, to build relationships, and to make our system sustainable into the future, so that we can, again, build a system that hopefully is usable for us and for others. And that's a lot of the reason why we did an open source system as well. So we kind of, I guess, make a boutique system, but in an open source way. We benefited from a lot of the things that other collections had done in collective access. We're able to put it into our collection. And then we built a number of things that I think protocols, access protocols, permissions, that potentially would be useful moving forward. One other thing we did do is, parallel to this, we're also developing a digital preservation strategy for our collection. And as everybody here knows, working with digitization, as soon as you start to digitize, you immediately think about digital preservation. So we're a small institution, so we can't preserve in the cloud, because again, that's not sustainable for us. So we chose a tape, kind of offline version of LTO version of digital preservation, but we actually created a module in here to manage the preservation metadata. So as we enter everything into the system for the first time, we can immediately put that digital preservation into the system alongside of the other metadata, and then just export it out with our preservation files. So while it's not brilliant, but for us it was really, really exciting, and it's also something we can pay back into the system. So now the system that was not a digital preservation system, and technically is still not, has the capacity for smaller institutions who really, really need digital preservation to now attach that to their systems moving forward. So that's kind of what we mean by capacity building, by leveraging, and by being part of a cultural heritage community, paying it forward, I guess. So talking a little bit about community. So institutional knowledge, like many communities here, really lies in individuals for us. So how do we build a system that allows us to transfer that into the system and support it and have it for those people that are coming after us? We inherited a lot of legacy systems, as I said, that unfortunately didn't give us that information we needed when we needed it. As I mentioned, we have an aging survivor community, those relationships that are built. And it's, as you hear survivors, they come into our center on a daily basis, they talk about that legacy moving forward and what's going to happen to it. So for them to see their stories digitized, for them to see them being used in the context of community to educate students is very important. So hence the preservation piece was really important for us. And for a small organization, these projects have essentially tripled our staff for 2 years. So there's a lot of organizational change going on, which, is positive for the most part, but it does shift kind of priorities, and it shifts things, and those kinds of things. So that's really impacted as well how we've built the system and how we've been able to progress. So institutional infrastructures, norms, cultures, they can be slow to shift, and they can, kind of wreak havoc on deadlines for sure, as well as space and staffing, etc. So those were some lessons we learned. So this map here, so I was talking about how we were able to look at our collection and ground our decisions for what we did in our collection. This is Dr. Robert Krell. He's a professor emeritus from UBC in psychiatry. He's a child survivor of the Holocaust. He started this video testimony project in '79. This is him actually giving an address at the UN last year on Holocaust Remembrance Day. And so in our system, Dr. Robert Krell has a phenomenal amount of identities or entity relationships with things. So each of those boxes represents a record. So it's a library record, an archival record, a testimony record, an exhibition, things have been featured in, a book, etc., or another entity. And then the links are basically those relationships. So the text that links the boxes defines what the relationships are. And believe it or not, this is only probably half of his relationships. His parents are in our system as Holocaust survivors. He also has a family who rescued him. So as Righteous Among the Nation, they're in our system. He's an author. He's the creator of a project. He's an interviewer. He's an interviewee. He holds so many roles. And so all of those relationships were really hard to define in the system. But through working it through, we're able to then build a system that affords for those relationships. So when you look at his collection and you kind of put in his name, you get all of the material, not just the library, not just the archive, the testimony. You get all of that information that's available that people are allowed to access comes up in a relationship kind of form. And I apologize. I just kind of drafted these up because our system isn't, I can't show you what it looks like, but it's, looks like this. And so by putting four systems together, because they're so different, we had to do some innovative things. So we used resource type. So if you look at resource type like a book or a museum object or a moving image like a testimony, you can search all four collections at once, which for us was a coup. And you get a pretty robust return, but then there's secondary and tertiary sources, so you can limit those by subject, by dates, by geography. And then for the library, so for the museum, testimony, and library, archive, museum, sorry, everything with the library, museum, testimony, and archives collection, we did genres. And so primary sources, again, we're an education institution, so the learning outcomes for BC students, the curriculum, primary sources are very important, and so we build a lot of curriculum into our programming. So this allows you now to search the collections are very specific. Like we have as you can see, things that are very, very specific our collections. So we're really able to hone it right in and get a really robust and rewarding research for those users of our system. And again, you can put in secondary and tertiary sources after this. This is a back-end view of a survivor testimony record, and what this kind of demonstrates, just as an example, is how you can see on the left-hand side here, so these are all some of the things we're able to build in, like the digital preservation, the access points, the things like that. But also, this is Alex Buckman, a child survivor himself, and this is his journey from basically the journey that he talks about in his story, but then we can manifest this more. And some of the things about geography in this system as well is we can customize it. So the nice thing about this system, and so it's applicable to us, but I think it's broadly applicable beyond us, is in systems like this, you also have to have authority file. So we were able to generate a local thesaurus that was very specific to the kinds of material we have, which is obviously very Holocaust focused. But also for places, we have these what they call the thesaurus of geographic names it tests against, but we also have what we put in as a place table of all the camps, so the ghettos, the camps, the elimination camps, the DP camp, the displaced person camps, etc. So it really, really made it specific to that, and students go in, use material, tag it, and there's a lot of interactive features such as Lightbox and timelines, and they can use this material then across collections. So they can pull in a library book maybe they've read for a class, they can pull in a portion of Alex's testimony because they can view it online and actually edit it in the system. They can combine that with an artifact in our collection that's related to Alex's recipe book that he in his talk to students, and they can make a presentation that then they can put out into a PowerPoint and present in their class. So it really makes our collection useful to students, to us, to our community. And I think I'm probably running on time here, so Yeah, I think that's probably a little bit about what we did and how we kind of hopefully collapsed some of those barriers. So I think it's really important to acknowledge the amazing team and advisors, many of which are in this room, that have helped us on the project, and some amazing, amazing students. So thank you so much for your time and attention today. I appreciate it.